Hello and welcome to part 2 of the descriptive and narrative question 5 of paper 1, and this is based on the examiner's secret advice on the 2017 exam that students took in June. So here, the best characters were created using contrast with each other. So they're either contrasted through their age or their upbringing, their class, if you like, their culture, their wealth, their religion, lots of different ways that you can contrast characters. Now, this excited the examiner a lot, which is good because that's what good writers do. I've featured contrast in many of my videos. Many of your teachers may not be teaching this explicitly. They'll be giving you, I don't know, lots of descriptive techniques like SOAP aims, which doesn't include contrast, and contrast is a top technique. It's also featured heavily in my guide, should you want to buy it. So, what were the imaginative ideas that impressed the examiner? Some students had a contrast between human characters and mythical characters, obviously picking on reading that they'd done, things like Lord of the Rings. Others had modern characters contrasted with characters from the past that they knew lots about, perhaps from film, TV, or from their reading, or indeed their study of history. Others used real characters that they knew, meeting a character from a well-known novel. The idea of it being a well-known novel means that obviously the examiner will know who you're referring to, but it'd be quite easy to have your character coming across the witches from Macbeth, or even Lady Macbeth, or whoever you want. Or it could be from a teen fiction kind of novel, like, I don't know, who are the famous vampires and werewolves, you know who I mean, or even Harry Potter, whatever you like. Or you could write in the style of a historic rather than a modern film genre. Now that's quite difficult to do unless you've acquired a bit of expertise, but that's not hard actually. It's it'd be an interesting way to revise. So the idea of like a film noir or a detective story. It would be quite easy to watch, I don't know, 4 or 5 classic films in a particular genre. Spend a Sunday with your popcorn and your ice cream, just watching loads of old films, maybe with your dad or your mum or your grandparents, and just try and soak up the atmosphere. And it would be really easy to write something fabulous if you practiced it in advance. And by the way, you can practice the stories you want to write in advance. I could sit down and write maybe 3 or 4 stories before the exam and know that versions of those would definitely come up. But anyway, that's up to you. And then number 5, writing in the style of an author in the first half of the 20th century, because that author will be writing in a style that's different from books you read today, and that will obviously get you really high style marks. It'll impress the examiners. My guide teaches you how to do that with this amazing writer that people don't really read anymore, but he's hilarious, called Damon Runyon, from the 1920s, and he writes comic stories about the gangster culture in the 1920s. Of course, you don't have to look at my guide for that. These books are available for free on the internet. Read them, and your stories will be so much different to everyone else's. And then there was another comment in the examiner's report which suggested to me that the student had been reading a particular teen fiction genre, which the senior examiner had not read. So I took from that angels are good. They haven't read those kinds of books, but vampires and werewolves may not be. They'll be fully aware of that genre, although you could still imitate it very well. But you could lift part of your story plot from a book like this, or loads of the other ones up here, that the examiners won't be aware of. Well, one of the good things about this exam is that it does place more importance on the structure of writing. So you have question 3 in the reading paper, which asks you about the structure of the text. And of course, that was the one that students did worse, as you'll know from my previous videos. But this is, I'm going to argue, a good thing because if you start to understand the structure of text, then you can write really brilliant stories of your own, or indeed brilliant descriptions, because you think about how they should be structured. And I spend quite a bit of time in my guide showing you that once you've decided on the ending of your story, actually you get a structure straight off. So your plan should begin with an ending. And I'll put a video link at the end of this video that shows you that exactly using a real life singer. But if you can plan the ending, everything will fit into place and the structure will be perfect. And the good news is there are 8 things that students did which the examiners love. So let's have a look at them. They loved when students had a change of focus in their story. So they might move from some detailed description of the atmosphere to zooming in on a character or two. And that change of focus using each paragraph as a different camera, zooming in or zooming out. They really like this technique. And of course, it links to contrast as well, which you saw was a really powerful technique in my first video. They love endings which show off the fact that they're an ending. And an easy way to do that is to repeat ideas from the beginning, but in a slightly different way. So you return to whatever your description at the beginning was, or your character at the beginning was, and you present them very slightly differently to show how they've changed, or how the atmosphere or the future, whatever it is, has changed as a result of your story. They really loved the extended metaphor, and I've just made a video on that in the last week or two. I'll try to put a link to that at the end of this video. Using the extended metaphor is such a brilliant way to show the examiner that you're crafting your story or indeed your description. This is an interesting one. The examiner specifically says they like stories that are 2 to 3 sides long. They don't like you using any extra paper. Um, and there's a simple reason for that examiners might not agree with me because they say, no, we've been trained, it doesn't matter. But they're human beings. And as a human being and a teacher, I know examiners do not get paid by the hour. So if they have to spend loads of time reading your 6-page long story, they simply won't want to give it as good a mark as a really good 3-page story. Why? Because they can read 2 of them in the same time and get paid twice as much. Money talks, ladies and gentlemen. Do not write stories which are too long. And you can avoid stories which are too long by planning your ending first. If you don't plan your ending first, you won't know how to get there, and you'll just be hoping that you'll think of a really good ending by the time the exam's up. By and large, that doesn't work. And even if it does work, it means you'll write a story that's much too long and therefore won't get into the top band. It'll feel rambling and not very well controlled. And the other 4 things that the examiners like are really quite mechanical. And when I first started teaching, I didn't really pay that much attention to them. I kind of thought they were a bit like painting by numbers. But the more I've practiced writing myself, the more I realize I was wrong. So let me explain what I mean. If you use loads of subordinate clauses, because each subordinate clause has a different idea in it, it forces you to have really interesting ideas in your sentences. So a shortcut to getting great ideas in your sentences is just to say, well, I'm going to need loads of subordinate clauses. I might do a separate video on this because the shortcut to getting subordinate clauses is just to use lots of really good verbs. If you've got lots of good verbs going on, your sentences will be interesting. Examiners particularly like the subordinate clause at the beginning of the sentence. And well, the reason for that is it shows a degree of planning, because you have to get to your final idea and then think, actually, what would it be like if I put that final idea I had at the beginning? That will make my writing more interesting. So subordinate clauses at the beginning of sentences are a big win for the examiner, but it's not just about the examiner. It genuinely will make your writing better because your verbs will be better and your sentences will just be full of more ideas. Right, to contrast with that, and remember contrast is a big deal, they do love really short sentences of between 1 and 4 words. Now, you could almost do this at random because the brain will try to make patterns and your brain will be unlikely to put a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 word sentence where it doesn't fit. So just forcing yourself to do it will work because most cases your sentence will actually fit. And if it's used at the right moment, it's used to surprise the reader or to emphasize a point. And that's actually a really interesting thing. A really easy thing to do and easy to make your writing interesting. So please practice that. Again, contrast. The examiner loves these long, complex sentences which are full of details and ideas, and you'll remember that. You can do that with subordinate clauses. So just loading up your sentences with subordinate clauses will do that. And then finally, this idea used to irritate me. You could just chuck in colons, semicolons, brackets, and dashes. Now, real writers will not do that. Okay, they never think, oh, I'm going to put some interesting punctuation in here. My readers will love that. I'll make loads of money. It just doesn't work. However, if you're writing in long, complex sentences full of detail and ideas, you can't punctuate them with just full stops and commas. It just won't work. You do need the help of colons to introduce an explanation, semicolons to separate noun phrases, for example, or subordinate clauses, or to join two sentences together. You do need brackets to add in extra information, and similarly with dashes. And so they're not there just for show, they're there in order to help you do that, which is another way of helping you do that. So actually, learning to use this punctuation will get you the higher marks because it forces you to write much more interesting sentences. So practice the punctuation, find examples in books that you're reading, and imitate those sentences. Copying is actually very creative. Well, you know what English teachers are like. They're pretty critical, so it won't surprise you to know there are 9 things that the examiners really hated. Number 1 on the list is a lack of planning, because this resulted in rubbish endings or no endings at all, which is why I recommended planning the ending first and then starting your writing. Another thing they hated was students writing a plan which was just a tick list of all the descriptive techniques that you'd want to use, lists like SOAP aims, which actually don't help you write the story. And writing something that was much too long or unfinished, again, because it wasn't planned. Right, here are some more things. The longer unplanned answers, examiners noticed, actually tended to start brilliantly because the student had a great idea, but then they got worse and worse as the student ran out of ideas. So that really didn't help them at all. There was a hell of a lot of focus on the senses. That's the final S in SOAP aims. Real writers hardly ever referred directly to what a character can hear or smell. They never say so-and-so could hear this or they could smell that. They just use words that suggest a sound or suggest a smell. That they don't actually refer to the character smelling this stuff or hearing this stuff. That's just too clunky. And in the same way, they never mention a character's ears or nostrils or noses or even eyes in the way that those parts of the face do stuff. They're not interested in that at all. Writers don't do that. They will use it to convey some sort of emotion. So you could describe the eyes to convey an emotion. You might have a character flaring their nostrils as though in anger, but never to smell something. Real writers just don't do that. So don't do it. And then finally, in this list, students often show off a really brilliant vocabulary, but they don't know how to use it properly and often end up with really complex vocabulary that they apply wrongly, or they make up huge, massive words like humongous, which isn't even treated as a real word. Right, well, the next two I'm going to have to be a bit blunt about. Often, and this happens an incredibly often, huge amount of the time, students ending nearly every verb in their sentence with ing. And often this means that the sentence never actually ends. Yes, the student sticks a full stop in, but it's in the wrong place because the sentence is still carrying on. None of the verbs have finished. They're still carrying on in the past tense with ing all the way through. Don't do it. It leads to a lot of inaccuracy and, to be frank, it's really boring way to write. Open up any book that you've enjoyed reading and you will find that the sentences are not full of verbs that end in ing. This is a particular way of failing the exam. Students do this all the time. They don't really think it's important, but put yourself in the shoes of an English teacher. It's really the equivalent of not putting on your underwear or not knowing how to tie your shoelaces. It's a basic fundamental thing. And if you can't do this, it just makes you look stupid. So lots of sentences being linked by commas. You can't link a sentence by a comma. Commas do not link sentences together, but students do this all the time. It's got a special name. It's called comma splicing, where you splice two sentences together using a comma instead of a full stop. If you can't get commas right, you simply aren't trying. It's not rocket science. It just needs attention and care and practice. The examiner will take you for a fool, even if the rest of your writing is brilliant. You will get marked down so much if you get commas wrong. And this is my opinion, but I think the examiner's right to do that. If you can't get commas right, you are just being an idiot. There's no excuse for it. Yes, it is a bit difficult and you'll have to practice it. So deal with it. It's a skill for life, not just for the English exam. People will judge you on your writing forever. So either you want to look like an idiot or you don't. And then finally, in this mini harangue from the examiner, the same goes for students who get apostrophes wrong or can't punctuate speech correctly. It's in every single book you've ever read. Just pay attention. It's all there right in front of you. And you don't even need a teacher to teach it to you. You just have to look at a book and say, well, what's the pattern here? Can I work it out for myself? Yes, you can. So to an English examiner, this is the equivalent of being 16 and not being able to tie your own shoelaces or even buy your own clothes. You would laugh at a friend that didn't buy their own clothes, who just let their parents do it for them. Really, you'd say, is that really what you're like at 16? Well, that's what the examiner's doing. And that's what an employer's going to do. And that's what a future partner is going to do. I know plenty of people, believe me, who wouldn't go out with you if you couldn't spell. Because they just see it as a sign that A, you might be dumb, and B, if you're intelligent, you're still dumb for not having corrected that obvious mistake. So just don't do it. Well, that was a bit of a negative way, wasn't it, to end the video? So let's just go back and remind ourselves of the stuff the examiners loved. So it was those 4 things there and those 4 things there. Do those and you will be sorted. If you'd like more videos, don't forget to subscribe and good luck in your exam. But of course, Don't leave it to luck. Practice now, ace the exam later.